Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I am Heena Goswami, editorial consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. At IGPP Expert Talks AI special series, over the course of last few episodes, we have engaged with experts from all over the world to understand the impact AI would make on education and human cognition. And in this series, today we are joined by Dr. Kathleen Bentley. Dr. Caitlin Bentley is a senior lecturer in AI education at King's College London and is actively shaping the future of responsible AI through education. She is a member of the UKRI Responsible AI UK delivery team and she co leads the Skills program. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talks.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, as AI takes over tasks like information recall and content generation, traditional education models that are focused on what are being disrupted. How do you see the purpose of education evolving to emphasize the deeper dimensions of how and why in this new AI-driven landscape?
Mm-hmm. It's the question of the day, and such a complex one to even begin to confront. And it's so different across the world. So I can only reflect in my own context in the UK, where I work in a university. We are regulated by our government to provide education that meets certain quality standards. We're steeped in decades and decades and histories of knowledge production and various ways that we view knowledge and education in this society. But to me, all of it leads to where I am right now, where someone, me, in a system has specified what people need to know in order to have this degree. And then what's even more challenging is we've made it into a business, and now we're saying if we don't give you these learning outcomes, then you can sue us, essentially. So it creates to me a miserable tension in how we view education as something that exists, that we have to provide for people. And for me, that is just what creates the what problem. It's because that knowledge is existing out there and we've decided what it is. And now it's just a matter of the students going through this process and gaining some skills along the way. From other educational theorists, ones that I would far more rather support, critical pedagogy, where it's a lot more focused on discussion and inquiry and relationships and behaviors. You move away from education that is about something that a student has to learn towards something that a student would find valuable to learn, that would help them be more confident or have better relationships with their colleagues, or be more innovative or contribute something meaningful to society. The problem that I'm seeing more and more, though, is just how much of a challenge it is to do that kind of education in the systems that we have, because we have class sizes of 300, 400, and similarly when in the schools in England as well, that curriculum at the national level exists, and even though there's a big focus on student-led learning, it's so variably done. A lot of it depends on the teachers, and having those relationships with the students and learners in general.
So the UNESCO survey in 2023 revealed that less than 10% of the schools and university have developed institutional policies or final or formal guidance concerning the use of Gen AI application. So given this gap between the what students are experiencing on a daily basis and what the institutions are equipped to handle, teachers would find themselves in sort of this position where they have to act as a bridge, even when they themselves are not really, you cannot expect a history teacher, an old political science teacher to be equipped in Gen AI application. I agree definitely that they should catch up on the technology and they should do it faster. But there's a lot of catch.
For me, the important bit is that students, teachers, governments, we all have a responsibility in shaping the way that impact is impacting on our lives. And, so frequently we hear about AI revolutionizing education or technology is transforming our society, but it's not. It's people, it's large companies, it's massive power structures that are shaping the technology in their interests, and the rest of us are left to deal with it, and to feel like we have to catch up all the time. And students, of course, are going to use it if it benefits them, if their education is not meaningful to them, or if they don't really understand what risks it poses for themselves, their communities, their future careers, then of course, like, that's a problem. And I think a history professor would be perfectly positioned to examine, what happened during the Industrial Revolution. Again, I'm sorry, I'm in the UK. In the Industrial Revolution, when all of those jobs, with the weavers, where women were weaving at home, like, what happened when all of those jobs moved into factories, and the same amount of work that 5 weavers could do, 1 could do. And then even if the women were in those factories, now we had a childcare problem because children were now at the factories and getting hurt and so on and so forth. So, like, these things come up, and we've learned certain lessons, like in terms of child labor and child's rights, from observing what happened in those contexts, and we need to do the same again. And I think we don't know, like, what the impact of an over-reliance on AI is. There's lots of evidence to show mixed effects. What happens if we become dependent and it's no longer available? Or what happens in your Indian education system when all of your students are using tools that have been developed with different knowledge languages that are not your own? Like, we have to raise awareness and have critical discussions about this. So to me, it's everyone's responsibility, even if that history teacher does not know anything about Gen AI, is to have conversations about what would it mean if you gave all of your learning about history to this AI? Because I'm sure they can recite facts much better than my students can. Why is history important to that student? Why is it important for them to know about history, and how can we meet students at that level? And if it is just a conversation about AI, and if you're using AI in my course, what are you gaining? What are you losing from it? And having that open discussion about it, I think, is something we need to do. At the same time, at the policy level, you mentioned, schools not having clear policies. Students are using it. We need to prepare teachers to deal with it. And you mentioned UNESCO, who does have like a framework for human-centered AI, which I think is very comprehensive, but it may be a bit overwhelming. And again, I think through my work with UNESCO, but in the Institute for Lifelong Learning, where we focus more on adult education, which is where I see, you know, a massive challenge and a huge area that we need to kind of consider, because this transformation is happening quickly. And it's not just the children we need to worry about, but how everybody can get involved in having a bit more power and control over what's happening in their lives, right? In terms of their professions, a lot of people might be confronting reskilling or upskilling, or as you're saying, like feeling left behind or what have you. But in that work, we focus not specifically on AI. We focus instead on those relationships between educators and adults. It's more based on adult learning principles, which are around, more self-directed learning, things where adults would have an interest and they'd want to learn something more, and they'd be able to develop their skills to kind of craft their own learning journey. But in that space, I would say, when you work with policy actors, there's always a big pressure to teach educators the latest tools so that our educators can integrate technology effectively. And there are massive opportunities, I would say, also in terms of more inclusion or assistive technologies that we really could be taking more advantage of and investing more in. But on the flip side, to me, it's really about that reflection on where am I in the world? What are my beliefs around education and teaching? What are the beliefs that my students have, or what are their aspirations and hopes, and what do they need out of education? Sorry, I'm just gonna turn off my, there you go. So what do they need out of their education? And there are massive, technological constraints. What makes sense? What are they already using? What's going to be beneficial to them to use? And likewise, like, how can we, build in our education not just the tendency to use technology, but what are the risks of using it as well, like over dependence, or likewise, online fraud, things like that they may not have encountered before. And I think when you approach it from their current context and where the needs really are, and factoring into this discussion of like, how can we grapple and deal with these changes that are coming, and how can we work together in solidarity to make these technologies work for us? It's a different approach than saying, here's a new technology, we need a policy, we need rules around it, we need to teach people how to use it. I'm more on the side of, let's think about, what are the things we need to be concerned about this technology first? What benefits could it have for us? But equally, what do we really need to be careful about? And through that, again, it's not always going to be about learning how to use the technology, but about how to have those conversations and have that critical reflection. Any teacher. Yeah.
In one of your works, you have also highlighted that AI should be seen not just as a tool, but as a social artifact. Now, how can this framing be effectively incorporated into subjects like computer science education, where people are actually developing AI applications, and
Mhm.
especially in global South context, where we feel that there's a certain disconnect between science and humanities, like there are two different subjects studied in two different ways.
Yeah, it's not easy. Like this is a career's worth of work, if not multiple careers worth of work, I think. But there are luckily some emerging researchers and practitioners that care about this. I think for myself, it's a real struggle to influence the curriculum to begin with. We have an accreditor in the UK, which we have to show that our program meets these certain requirements. I think it's quite, it's quite easy for professors or teachers to fall back on the ways that they learned about technology when they're teaching about technology. And it's really actually challenging to confront, I would say, like the hierarchies that are embedded in computer science around technical knowledge, like being prioritized, or sitting higher in the hierarchy of knowledge altogether. I have like a first year course in which we try to teach our students how to reflect on their culture, on the impacts that AI is having, or impact of not only AI, but I also teach in the computer science program, the impacts or ethical issues of what happens when technology goes out of companies and into society. And it's challenging. I think students come to our programs because they like the order and logic of computer science. They like that there are answers to problems and that they can take a procedural approach to something and feel a bit like a sense of accomplishment there. And so it's a challenging process. It takes time. I think we need to do it every year. We need to, make it more interesting or engaging with actual contexts and environments for them, so they could see the value of it. And with my undergraduate projects, this is like their third year project where they get to do some independent research. And I often offer projects that are designed to, think outside the box. Like, how could we teach data structures from a feminist point of view? And it's really hard. It's very, very hard for my students to do this. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Like, it's hard to imagine different ways of, thinking about what data structures could be in a computer system, let alone teach it in a different way. So there's that part. Like, we're dealing with massive historical traditions and knowledge hierarchies here. From the Global South perspective, sorry, what did you mention? What did you say about that?
I don't know how it is like in the UK, but in India, I feel we also need to change how we view career and how we view labor, human labor, because we
Mhm.
give a lot of importance to your white collar jobs, and that you need to be, doing a certain job to have a certain status. I feel we need to change that. Jobs that involve manual labor are going to be here longer than the ones that involve your desk, sitting on a desk and reading and writing. And I
Mhm.
feel we need to change how we view human labor, and we need to give primacy to people who are doing jobs such as cleaning, cooking, such as taking care of the city. I mean, in various ways,
Mhm.
they need to be highly well paid, if not
Yeah,
highly paid, they
yeah.
need to be well paid. We should also teach our children that they are viable career options. And
Yeah, I completely agree. And there are certain jobs where there's a lot of research, in terms of social care robots or what have you, where we're saying things like, well, the innovation is happening because we're just not going to be able to deal with the scale of the problem. And to me, the most obvious solution is if you made the career more attractive and valued it more, paid them more, of course, people would do those jobs, and I think they would be much better at them than robots, in my view. Um, but again, it's more about who's looking at these problems holistically and who's willing to stand up and say, social care is not a profitable sector. It's something that we value in the public interest, that we all need to come together and say that as a society, we care about this and we want these services to be provided for everyone, or, and to me, if we can't radically revisit our taxation structures or get over this hump of, um, you know, bloated governments or things like that, I feel like we should be able to figure out how to run public services efficiently and effectively, um, and to be able to redistribute benefits that are being accrued through AI innovations in whatever sector, um, to meet those needs. But it's a
And I
challenge.
agree with you on what you said about it is the big techs, it's the corporates that are telling us that we have a lot of catching up to do. And it is the tech who is driving the discourse now. And as a society, we're not thinking enough on whether we really need this, whether we really need robots to care for human, when we have enough, when unemployment in a country like India is on the rise, when you
Mhm.
don't have enough, when, I mean, are we sure that AI is what we need, or it just big tech's telling us that we are somehow behind in the race?
Yeah, exactly. And those are the conversations that we need to have. But I think we also need to create space, um, to really think about, given this the scope and scale of these larger foundation models. There have been discussions on the one hand about, each country should create their own foundation model, but can we balance that with environmental concerns or privacy concerns? I'm not sure, but I do think there's a lot of good work that can be done to really examine these questions around, like, how would you design either interactions with these technologies or the technologies themselves in a participatory way that reflects different kinds of knowledge systems, different kinds of people and perspectives and ways of working with technology. And I am really, concerned about, like, the quality of jobs and the quality of work that we do, like, and what are we living for if we don't take some pride and, enjoyment from what we do and how we do it? They're all super interesting questions to me, but I don't think we have good answers yet for.
I also feel we are, whether in politics or in technology, we are going through going towards homogeneity, where everything needs to be uniform, everything needs to adhere to a certain practice, certain way, there's a certain benchmark.
Mhm.
But humans are not like that. We have such a diversity of culture, environments, ecology, psychology. I mean, we are so
Mhm.
varied, right? But we are
Yes,
striving for some sort of mad uniformity. And
yes.
I think that is going to take a lot of toll on human civilization as a whole. Uh,
Yeah, and I think there is some, from the computer science side, there's some developments in terms of taking more plural approaches to what they call values alignment. And then there's also, fields of like whole subsets of philosophers and computer scientists that explore things like more democratic ways to align human values and technology. But it's so narrow in scope at this moment. And the one thing that I find concerning from that as well is the notion of solidarity, and where do we find a way to have these debates, at a global scale, regionally, at a community level, in inclusive ways, and that aren't just dictated by the majority, but that can be deliberated or discussed between different kinds of perspectives and how we might build consensus across them. Because it also seems like if we start to encode these values into technology deliberately, and we're not transparent and explicit about that and how these values mean different things across cultures, or where these values conflict with each other, even within our communities, or they disregard certain perspectives, and we're not able to have a process where we can, think about the impacts that that will have, it becomes really challenging. And especially in education, we talk a lot about values-based, or I talk a lot about values-based education, but it's incredibly hard to assess that. Like, how do you, you know, when you come back to the educational institution, these are things that we need to foster, but difficult to quantify or accredit or whatever you want to call it.
I'm so happy the conversation has taken this turn, and I would conclude it with asking you last question about something that you have been a proponent of, operationalizing intersectionality in research data practice. And could you just elaborate a little on how an intersectional approach to data and AI in education might help surface hidden power structures, and how this might transform both pedagogy and institutional responsibility?
Mhm. So this this was largely based on some research that I did with colleagues at the University of Sheffield as well, and we analyzed a broad, like over 200 articles across intersectionality research from any kind of methodological orientation to think about how are they using data, what do they mean by data, to come to conclusions, who are they including in their research, how are they including them, things like that, in order for us to think about how would you, as you say, operationalize intersectionality in data science specifically. But it does have, applications to AI in the future, I would say. But it is really about, we built on Collins's research or book, and we highlighted 3 ways that we thought were the most valuable for helping data science and AI to work towards social justice and equity ends. And that was really about looking back to the history what is the history in this problem or context or for these people, which is never something we do in computer science or data science, to be honest. We might read some empirical literature from social science, but we wouldn't necessarily think to look back further than that. The second is systems thinking. And again, it's really about putting some of these problems into a context and thinking about the relationships between data, people, institutions in that context. And then the third part is really about positionality and taking a reflective stance in your research, which again is really very common in most social science and humanities research, but not within data science or computer science really, or AI on the technical side of things. And I think in the UK, we support an approach to research that's called responsible research and innovation, which is really about kind of a structured approach to being reflexive in your work. And it gives researchers a clear set of things to think about, like how are you anticipating the impacts of your research? How are you reflecting on what you're doing? How are you engaging people who would be impacted, or policy or practitioners in your research? And then action, like how do you take those aspects and integrate it into your research? And right now, I feel like there's still some work to be done to take this approach and actually make sure that it's transforming disciplinary practice, because it doesn't seem to be, for the most part, quite yet. Like if you look at all of the major AI conferences, you're not going to find a reflexive approach in any of those papers. Well, maybe not. I don't know. There's a lot of papers there, but anyhow. But the question, you started out with the question of intersectionality in what, can you remind me what the original question was?
Research data practice. And
yeah,
how
so I think one of the striking findings from that research that we did as well was that it was really about all of those three things together, because when you look at quantitative intersectionality research, and quantitative is what I would say what most data scientists typically do. They look at data sets. They don't usually collect them themselves. And for that reason, a lot of the discussion about what an intersectional approach would be, looks like, focuses on how do you analyze this data. But to us, it's really about that broader scope. Where does the data come from? Who is it representing? What's the historical issues in this context? What variables am I missing from this picture? Who's being excluded or included? All these sorts of things, but then also, where is it going? Like, what is this piece of work meant to do? And so on the one hand, I feel like it's a good starting point, as it draws a lot back to what I was talking about. It's really challenging to teach some of these skills to our students. We don't typically expect our students to have that depth of historical knowledge or to be able to find it. I think we can definitely improve in terms of systems thinking. I think that's a skill that everyone really should have. I'm biased, I know that. But again, that reflection, we're trying to start to foster that skill, but it's really difficult. But the thing that I would say could really be the most effective in this space is really about collaboration and multidisciplinary collaboration. And valuing those relationships, because as you said, humanities and social scientists, their perspectives are really valuable. And if we could just communicate better across these disciplines, or have connections where we could communicate better, and there's so much being done already, but we don't do this enough in our education. And one of my most recent studies that we did last year was looking at this. We designed with a multidisciplinary group of academics at King's College, from engineering, public health, digital humanities, and informatics. We came together and we wanted to design a workshop where students from different disciplinary backgrounds could come together and learn about AI with AI from a responsible AI approach, or equally education for sustainable development. So we were interested in thinking about how can we, teach this more balanced view of AI, and grapple with some of its limitations so that they don't become dependent on it, but also to highlight, what makes us truly unique and human in the scope of collaboration and what it's really going to take to solve some of these complex global challenges. And the thing that really hit home for me was, the first activity, we wanted them to explore an extreme heat theme, because you could look at extreme heat from lots of different angles. And we had sort of different themes within extreme heat, like health, water infrastructure, food insecurity. And we asked students to start thinking of questions that would help them investigate that complex challenge or that theme in their own interests. And they were able to use AI as well. And we gave them a resource that they could read as well. And through prompting AI and just coming up, brainstorming their own questions and comparing it to a resource that we had selected as well, they could initially kind of see some of the limitations with the text outputs of AI. But it was still, when we asked them to, they had their independent time to brainstorm and do their own research and come up with ideas. And then when we asked them to, within the group, share their questions and decide on a question that they wanted to investigate as a group, then the questions went from fairly simple, disciplinary focused questions to more nuanced questions that really grappled with some of the equity or social justice concerns that we have in sustainable development. And this was, really promising for me, because it shows you that, this is not something that AI can replace. But again, after we're finished this workshop, then we have to deal with this context where how can we bottle up this learning experience and have it in our own courses, and we just don't have a structure for it. We don't have multidisciplinary workshops that the students can get credit for. So it's promising, but also we have a long way to go in the future. And I would also say, also from the Global South perspective, one of the follow-on activities was really about, okay, now you've come up with this question, now let's think about different different roles in this context, and use generative AI to try and make a story or an image about that person or that person's perspective in relation to that complex challenge. And it was through that they could immediately see that the cultural stereotypes and the biases immediately came to the surface for them, which I don't think they had recognized before that. But at the same time, it was actually quite distracting for them, because what we really wanted them to do was to, you know, think about how their own interests or their own like positive views of this technology or what we can do with it, how their concerns or their interests may be different from people that are most impacted by it. But, you know, we've learned a lot from it, and hopefully we can share the paper soon. Should be soon.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for your